Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We're doing ecology today. So, this is the first video in a two-part series on ecology. And we're going to start right off and jump right in. Ecology is the study of an organism and its ability to interact with its environment. Every organism has to have some interaction with the environment around it, whether or not it's in the form of its living space, finding food, finding mates, other organisms, predator, prey. So we're gonna evaluate those characteristics now. The biosphere is the portion of the earth where all life exists. It is the entire planet and where there is living organisms. There are layers to this biosphere, levels of complexity. So we have some vocabulary in here that you're going to need to understand. A species is one type of organism that can mate and produce fertile offspring in an environment. A population are all the members of that particular species. The community includes all the different populations of organisms that live in a particular area. And then an ecosystem includes the living community and physical environment or population around them. So this is going to include living and non-living things. So let's look at this diagram real briefly and see if we can make sense out of it. And this particular one shows the levels of complexity as they, sorry about this. Sorry about that. Okay, so the individual is the smallest level of organization. In this case, they show an elk. And now you can have a population of elk that live in an area, and that population of elk interact with lots of other organisms in the community around them. This could include wildcats, beavers, owls, plants, all the different organisms that are found in their area. And that particular elk and those wild cats and owls and trees are all part of a larger ecosystem that is found in a certain area. And an ecosystem will have specific characteristics of temperature, rainfall, sunlight. It'll have different qualities of uh, uh, soil. It'll have different characteristic organisms that are found there. These ecosystems are organized into different biomes. And these biomes, again, like an ecosystem, are characterized by the amount of sunlight, the amount of temperature range that they experience, the amount of rainfall that they experience. All right, so biomes are determined by lots of living and non living characteristics to determine that particular biome. All right, so those are the levels of complexity that we see. Let's look at what the living and non living. Here, we've got a little typo in here already. Um, so, an abiotic factor is a non living part of the ecosystem. It includes the air quality, it can include the amount of oxygen, the amount of carbon dioxide, the water, and the water quality. What's in the water? Is the water highly oxygenated or not oxygenated? Is it warm water? Is it cold water? Is it salty? Is it fresh? The rocks or the soil quality are all abiotic factors. Temperature is an abiotic factor. When you put an A in front of a word, it means not. So abiotic means not biotic or not living. The biotic factors are all the living things in an ecosystem. Doesn't matter what it is. If it's interacting with another organism or the environment, it is a biotic factor. The habitat is the place where an organism lives, and that organism will take a particular niche or have a particular niche. That is a role that the organism plays in its ecosystem. For instance, examples of niches include decomposers. All right, bacteria's niche in the environment is its role. It's a decomposer. Plants are the producers of an ecosystem. So each organism has a specific role or place that it fits into this web of life that we're going to be talking about. And the limiting factors are factors or conditions that can limit the growth of a population. Anything that we talked about in the evolution unit, where we talked about Darwin identifying that there are certain factors that were going to become limited, that's going to put pressure on survival. Well, that's what limiting factors do. They put limits or pressure for survival. It can be the amount of water available, the amount of food available, or the space available. It can be availability of mates. It can be availability of habitat for housing, which is a major issue when we start talking about things like deforestation, because many small organisms have very limited ranges, the a limited range of where they can survive. So you start cutting down rainforest or habitat like that. Organisms have limited ability to adjust and find new habitat, especially if you're something small like an insect or a bug. Biodiversity is very important, and you're going to be doing a lab on biodiversity. Uh, Recognizing the importance of biodiversity. It is the total number of types of organisms in an area. Biodiversity is a sign of a healthy environment. So, a healthy environment is going to have a broad variety of types of organisms. And whenever we as humans decrease biodiversity by, for instance, plowing over a field and just planting corn, it causes an increased risk for disease and disruption to the ecosystem around us. The carrying capacity of an area is represented by the number of organisms that can survive in an area. How many individuals can the land or area support? This is often graphed, and we see a graph like this because it outlines one of the fundamental factors behind this, which is there's going to be some competition for resources. All right, so in this particular graph, you can see the introduction of a population. So it might start off very low, and there's a really great example of this in Australia with a couple of different species. Whenever you introduce a new species to an area that it's not normally found, the founding population is small, but they will breed with each other and the populations will increase until they get to a point where there's just not enough food to support that population anymore. And then it will start to die off, but it will not go away. There's not going to be a complete extinction event, but the population will drop until it goes below what the environment can support. And then the population will level out and recover. And there's this constant back and forth based on the conditions in the environment that establishes a fluctuating population based on the environment's carrying capacity. All right, so let's look at nutritional relationships. Some of these are going to be old hat, and we're going to throw in some more complicated, potentially newer ones as well. Autotrophs automatically make their own food. These are the plants. They can synthesize their own food from inorganic compounds. Just a reminder of what inorganic means. Inorganic is the term that means not carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen containing compounds. Remember, the organics are things like sugars, proteins, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. Those are all organic. All right. They have carbon and hydrogen and oxygen combined. The inorganic compounds are things like water, oxygen, carbon dioxide. Now, these organisms can take water, carbon dioxide, and inside of the cellular structures, the chloroplasts, they can convert those into sugars. Right? There are two varieties of autotrophs. There are chemoautotrophs and photoautotrophs. All right, chemoautotrophs are those organisms that live at the bottom of the ocean and can survive in volcanic vents in the absence of light. Photoautotrophs require light. The heterotrophs are those organisms that require the consumption of organic material from other organisms. They depend on another organism for their food. They can either be living on an organism like this shelf fungus here. It could consume it as a predator. There are lots of different types of heterotrophs, and 3 different varieties are included here. All of these, 1, 2, and 3, are heterotrophs. So you have saprophytes, which are the decomposers, right, like fungi and bacteria. There are herbivores, which are animals that eat only herbs or plants. They have special enzymes in their digestive tracts to be able to digest plants. We don't have those enzymes. And third on the list here are carnivores. Those are organisms that can eat other animals, and they come in different varieties too. There are predators, which kill and eat their prey by hunting it. There are also scavengers that are going to get their food by feeding on other dead animals. So vultures and hyenas are typical examples of scavengers. There are omnivores, which are animals that eat both plants and animals. And that's going to include things like raccoons, pigs, and bears. They tend to be opportunistic. So, where's the food and what can I get today? Those are opportunistic organisms. They'll take what they can get when they can get it. There are instances where organisms exist together and they rely on each other either in a positive or negative fashion. And this is like a super gross topic. Everybody gets weirded out by this and they find it disgusting. And generally, it's pretty gross. But there's a whole section of medical practice where you deal with parasitology, the study of parasites. These are organisms that benefit at the expense of their host. Athlete's foot is an example of a parasite that is a fungus. Tapeworms and all sorts of there are many different varieties of worms that can become parasites on the human body or the bodies of other organisms. This is why dogs have to have heartworm medication. You can see that these parasites can get into your body and manifest or show in different varieties. There's also the guinea worm, which is a parasite found in third world countries of Africa. where the bot fly lays its eggs in excuse me, not bot fly, but it's the tsetse fly, I believe, lays eggs in the skin of other organisms, and you can get these long larval worms that will be found in the skin, and they have to be removed. This is an example on the bottom right here. This is an example of an infection that sometimes who gets it? Like wrestlers will get it. It's a fungal infection that you can pick up from spores that are found right in the environment around us. You can pick up parasites from feces. If you accidentally consume feces, or dogs like to sometimes go out and eat feces, there are parasitic eggs and larvae in some uh, of the waste material that animals leave around. So you don't want them in your body or on your body because they can get inside. Those are all parasites. These are another type of symbiotic, which means living things together. This is a commensalist relationship where one organism benefits and the other one is not affected. So in a parasite relationship, the host is negatively affected, but in a commensalist relationship, the host could care less. It is not harming the host, and it's not harming the commensalist itself. It's actually benefiting the commensalist. So barnacles on this whale, these barnacles are growing on the skin of the whale, and the whale doesn't really care. It's not hurting the whale, but the barnacles are being brought to a food supply because the whale is constantly going to find food for itself. Not lichens, orchids in tropical trees. Those are a variety of plant that actually grows on the tree, because if they were to grow on the ground, they would never get enough sunlight. So they've evolved to grow in the tree, and they take advantage of the height of the tree to be able to elevate themselves up to get sunlight. Here's another one, lichens living on the side of a tree. You can see these everywhere around here. The tree is not harmed by these lichens, but the lichen has the benefit of living on the tree, facing the sunlight, and having an opportunity to survive with ample living space. Now, we are going to say the lichen itself is unique because it's a combination of a fungus and an algae. And this is going to come up in our next slide, because this is not a commensalist relationship, but this is what's known as a mutualist relationship. Now, mutualism is when both the host and the the mutualist organism benefit. There are lots of examples of these in nature. Remoras with sharks. These little remora fish will swim around and on the skin of the shark, and they kind of have rasping mouths that will remove algae. It'll remove little bits of leftover food, and in fact, these remoras will even be allowed to swim into and around the mouth of the shark, and the shark won't eat them, because the remora is providing a cleaning service for the shark. So here we have an egret, which is a small bird that can ride on the back of lots of organisms that live in the savannas, the grasslands of Africa. We see these egrets living on the backs of elephants. They roost on the backs of rhinos and what's left of those rhinos anyway. since we poach the heck out of them. So these are eating insects off of the backs of these larger animals. So it's providing a service for those large animals because they're not being bitten by small insects. So there's a nuisance value to those insects, but it's a meal for the egrets. Coral is a There are a lot of different things going on with coral here. There's a microorganism called zooxanthella. These zooxanthella are photosynthetic organisms that have the ability to take sunlight energy and convert it into food. They live in conjunction with uh, another organism. So you've got the zooxanthella existing within the cells of the coral. And the zooxanthella do the photosynthesis, and the coral does the providing of some of the essential organic and inorganic nutrients that are necessary for the zooxanthella to survive. This is a very delicate relationship, though, because the coral can only survive. This relationship will only exist in a very stable environment. And so that's why we talk about coral bleaching. As the ocean temperatures rise, the zooxanthella actually will flee. They'll exit the cells of the coral, and the coral no longer has something providing the photosynthetic organic nutrients of sugars, and so it ends up dying. It gets bleached out, and it's just a stalk. This is a type of coral called elkhorn coral. But this elkhorn coral will be bleached white, and it's dead. And it cannot come back. What will happen is you'll get, instead, because there's still sunlight available, you'll get algae growth on there, and it'll look green and it'll look hairy. It is dead, though. Um, we're working vigorously to try and maintain the coral reef ecosystems, because this coral skeleton is made out of carbon. And the coral reef system is a vast uh, source of sequestering carbon dioxide, sequestering to hold it in and be a reservoir for it. And so by removing the living organisms, they can't pull in more carbon, which means they're not removing the carbon dioxide from the environment and from the atmosphere. That's detrimental to the overall health. And that brings us back to biodiversity, because there's a decrease in biodiversity when these organisms start to die. There's one other example on here that we hadn't talked about yet, and it's one of everybody's favorites because of the whole Finding Nemo event. The clownfish living with anemones because they're provided with protection from the anemone, and the anemone gets pieces of food and material that the clownfish hasn't eaten, because it is often misunderstood, but these anemones do eat. They are carnivores. They will eat food. They can and would normally sting and consume small organisms, but the anemone has evolved. The clownfish has evolved a mucus layer over its skin that helps provide some protection so they don't get stung by the anemone. All right, the last thing on our list to cover for today are our nature cycles. There are three cycles that you need to be familiar with. The water cycle, which you've probably known about since elementary school because they talk about it so much. But the water cycle is uh, simply identified by the the effects of our environment on water. So you've got water that evaporates. As the evaporated water condenses into clouds, when the temperature decreases, you get precipitation in the form of rain or snow or hail or whatever, it's precipitation, right? But here's the thing: air pollutants can be mixed in with that water vapor, and when precipitation occurs, the pollutants come back out, and those pollutants are now in the water. And that's not a positive thing, because whatever pollutants go into the air, they end up in our water cycle, and we need the water to maintain our crops, provide water for us. And if that water is polluted, then you have a whole series of problems that go along with that. All right, so you've got evaporation, condensation, you have transpiration, which is evaporation off of plants or through plants, and then that runoff or percolation is the infiltration of water into the surface of the soil. The quality of the ground, the soil, is going to have a major impact on what happens with that water. If you have nice absorbent soil, then that water is going to stay in the soil and plants are going to be able to use it. If, like many of us around here, we have a lot of clay and silt in our soil, so clay does not allow water to go through, so you end up with a lot of standing water or flooding as a result of the water not being able to infiltrate farther. You can also have rocky areas where the water will not absorb, and you end up with flooding. This is why we use plants and root activity to hold soil so that it doesn't erode. The nitrogen cycle is the cycle that shows the movement of nitrogen in the form of plants or other organic compounds through our through our food systems. All right, and it really is a result of, here we go, as I move this towards the front, it's a result of two important facets. You've got bacteria, the nitrifying bacteria, right, and the decomposers that are going to be the microscopic organisms that allow nitrogen to be absorbed by plant systems. Those nitrifying bacteria and decomposers make the nitrogen available to plants. The plants have the nitrogen in them now, and other animals can eat them. When those animals eat them, they get the nitrogen. If you are a vegetarian, vegetarians need to get their protein from plants. So they change their diet to accommodate not eating animals, but they do need nitrogen, which is a fundamental part of proteins. And so they have to eat beans, legumes, peanut butter, or other nuts for sources of protein. They need those proteins to be able to assimilate into their bodies so they can make proteins that their bodies need. But whenever someone dies or something dies, it decomposes and it will be returned through the nitrifying bacteria. And then there's also nitrogen in the atmosphere that those plants can also absorb. The last cycle is the oxygen carbon dioxide cycle, which is one of the ones that you learned about when you were younger, I'm sure of. Through the action of photosynthesis, plants take in carbon dioxide, they make sugars, out of those carbon dioxide molecules through photosynthesis. They also are provided with the raw materials to grow their plant. All right. All that carbon is becoming part of them. And as a result, their waste product is oxygen, which is released into the atmosphere. And all of us aerobic organisms need the oxygen to be able to do cellular respiration. The action or chemical reaction, I should say, is outlined here. You've seen this before during the course of the school year. Uh, and they are essentially reverse reactions of each other so that it can become a cycle. Carbon dioxide in water is used to make sugars in photosynthesis, and those sugars are combined with oxygen in cellular respiration to be converted, have the energy be converted into ATP molecules. That leads to more carbon dioxide in water, and the cycle repeats itself. The organelles inside of the cells that you need to be familiar with are the mitochondria in the organisms that are doing cellular respiration. And just a minor note, plants do cellular respiration. They have mitochondria, right? Photosynthesis is going to have the organelle, the chloroplast found in plants, and they will be able to take in carbon dioxide and water and release glucose and oxygen into the plant cell. Okay, so that is the end of part one of our ecology slides. Please make sure that you watch the video that is highlighted on slide 2. So now would be a great time for you to go back, open up the slide presentation, and click this link to see some adaptations. I also want to remind you that you're going to have a Bioman lab activity to complete. So make sure you're getting on top of that one. If you have any questions with those assignments found on the virtual learning schedule, please contact your teacher. Have a great day.